Nearly 1 in 2 people in the southern United States knows at least one person who has died of a drug overdose. That's according to a Rand Corporation study that was published yesterday. Nearly 500 million Americans have died from opioid overdoses since 1999, according to the CDC, and those numbers just continue to grow and are expected to continue to grow. I'm joined now by two substance abuse experts ahead of a community discussion tonight at the University of North Florida. Dr. Katherine Hooper, Director of UNF's Behavioral Neuroscience Program. Hey, Dr. Hooper.
Hi, good morning.
And Dr. Mitch Miller, Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of North Florida. Hi, Dr. Miller.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Sorry, I'm just going to adjust the mic there a little bit for you. All right, for our listeners, if you know somebody who has struggled with or died from opioid dependency, what do you think is needed to combat the epidemic? You can call us at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Dr. Miller, the new report that I mentioned from the Rand Corporation tries to quantify the impact of the opioid, the epidemic on communities, including children of overdose victims, and that impact is really impossible to overstate. How did we get here?
Well, a lot of people think that it's a function of what's going on at the border, and I work in partnership with sheriffs and police chiefs, jail administrators across the country, and they certainly are attesting to a before-after effect. But other people say that there is a direct relationship to the legalization of marijuana throughout the country as well, and that there's been the old gateway argument. But irrespective of how we've gotten here, I think it's important to point out that the problem is probably much more severe than we're realizing. One of the things that I focus on with my partners at UNF and elsewhere throughout the region is jail-based screening for substance abuse and mental health disorders, because so many people that suffer from opioids and other substance misuse go through the justice system, and that is perhaps one of the only chance that society will have to diagnose and direct these people to treatment. So
the numbers are pretty amazing when it comes to the intersection of opioid addiction and crimes. I believe it's estimated that 1 in 5 prison inmates are there for a drug-related offense, and that 65% of the U.S. prison population has some sort of active substance use disorder. What changes do you think need to happen from a criminal justice perspective, Dr. Miller, about handling this?
Well, I think that the problem is being addressed in a broad-scale manner already through several of the U.S. Department of Justice agencies, such as especially the U.S. Bureau of Justice Assistance. There are multiple federal funding programs that provide resources for the jail-based disorder screening to connect people to treatment, to provide training to law enforcement officers on a range of issues, from the administration of Narcan to better understanding the signs of misuse and connecting people to treatment. Mm-hmm. And these programs provide vast amounts of funding for rural, suburban, and inner city areas where the problems tend to be concentrated. So I think that the resources are there. It's just a matter of forming the partnerships and really doing the hard legwork that it takes to want to make a difference.
Katherine Hooper, your perspective is medically, looking at this epidemic. And we hear about Narcan as a lifesaver. It's a drug that can reverse, immediately the overdose effects of an opioid. Why isn't it saving more lives?
Well, you have to get to somebody quickly. The problem with opiates is that they suppress breathing, which of course is something nobody wants, but it's a side effect. So if you don't get there fast enough with Narcan, then you can't stop somebody from dying from stopping breathing. Another problem is that when you give the Narcan, if you just give it to somebody, they suddenly get better, and then you release them, then they could still have enough opiates in their system that they overdose again. Like, they don't have to take any more. It just keeps affecting the same brain receptors once the Narcan isn't effective anymore. So you may have to give multiple doses. But somebody who's giving somebody Narcan should make sure that that person gets to the hospital right away, because they could still be in an overdose.
I had not heard that.
Yeah.
So at tonight's forum, what is it that you are going to be wanting to talk about? What questions do you anticipate the community has from a medical perspective about the epidemic?
I think they probably want to know how it got so bad so fast. And one thing I would say about that is that opiates have always been a problem. I mean, for thousands of years, people have been abusing opiate drugs. But more recently, now we have these synthetic opiates, which are a lot more effective. They're a lot more potent. They cross the blood-brain barrier a lot better than the original opiate is morphine. And then since then, organic chemists have been able to sort of tweak the molecule once they figured out what morphine was. It comes from the opium poppy. They were able to kind of chemically tweak it, make it cross the blood-brain barrier better, make it a more effective painkiller. It's a very, very effective painkiller. I mean, it's the best thing that we have for killing pain. But now that it can get to the brain a lot faster, it causes that sort of rush that people feel, which is very addictive. That changes the brain. It causes them to crave it. And so I think with these newer drugs that we have, they have just become unintentionally, when they've tried to make, the drug companies are trying to make them less addictive, but instead they've actually become more addictive. And so that, I think, is how it's happened so fast. And then with fentanyl just everywhere these days, that's how it happened. So I think people are wondering, how do we get to this point, and then what can we do to make it stop?
We've got a call. Charles, good morning. Charles, welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. So I lost my son to a fentanyl overdose. He had he was born with an addictive personality, which I'm sure y'all might want to mention, that people are actually they're born with an addictive personalities, and they only got to use a drug one time, and then they're hooked. And unfortunately, the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry in 2012 decided they would put OxyContin in every kitchen cabinet in America. And all the kids in schools and everything, they got the OxyContin out of their cabinets and had little parties. And if you had an addictive personality, you only had to take it one time, and you were hooked on it. And unfortunately, fentanyl came around, and that's what my son. My son was extremely intelligent. He was sought after by his corporation he worked for. They really loved him. He did great. They gave him bonuses and wrote him up in magazine articles because he was so good at what he did. But he would go have a little party every once in a while. I mean, he would just go back and shoot up theoretically some heroin. Well, it was laced with fentanyl, and it took his life, which happens a lot. And then the Narcan, I have it in my pocket. I carry it with me 24 hours a day. I always have it. So I guess something that needs to happen is people need to be educated. And I don't know how you feel about your children being educated in grammar school, or parents being grammar school, or the junior high or the senior high. But at some point, you have to have an understanding. You have to have an education as to what can happen if you just decide to have a little party with your buddies and take a pill, and it happens to be laced with fentanyl, and you're gone. It's over with. So it's a very difficult situation, and I think education is probably, and having Narcan for everybody to have it, and then just get smarter. Thank you.
Charles, our condolences about your son. Thanks so much for sharing your story. The availability of Narcan surely is, increasing. It's more available. I believe it's, you don't need a prescription. You can get it and carry it on you. But are there any programs in place right now, Dr. Miller, to educate young people about the dangers of addiction or opioids and fentanyl specifically?
Increasingly so. This has been a controversy, especially on college campuses over the last few years. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware and have heard of the term Narcan parties. A lot of the clients that we work with after they get out of the justice system or while they're still on probation, they will continue to use, and the same concept that someone would be a designated driver, 3, 4, 5 people will be the users, and they will engage in opiate abuse to the point of essentially what would be a fatal overdose, but then the designated Narcan administrator person is there. And that's just really scary that, people are sort of daring death in this fashion. But one other thing I would like to mention that is a follow-up to a point that the caller just made is that the increase that we're seeing in overdoses, and especially fatal overdoses attributable to fentanyl, are not due to fentanyl-seeking people. If the fentanyl it's an adulteration effect where it's in other more traditionally recreationally abused drugs and also pharmaceutically diverted drugs, especially Xanax and Valium.
We got a call, Susan from St. Augustine. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning. I just wanted to mention I was in the drugstore and I saw Narcan on the counter and I thought, I should probably pick some of this up just in case I ever need it. And it was $50. I think that's just a little bit too expensive for the regular human being.
Thank you, Susan. Good call. Just very briefly, Dr. Hooper, any sense that might get less expensive?
I don't know, but it is something that needs to happen. I have some Narcan. I got it free from a music festival where they were giving it out for free, and that would be great if we could make that a lot less expensive.
Well, Dr. Hooper, Dr. Miller, thank you so much for being here ahead of the panel at UNF. We look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.
Thanks.